Order, order. Thank you for joining us today for our second evidence session for the Youth Select Committee's inquiry into youth violence and social media. This session is to look at the tech angle and how young people are consuming content online. Can I start by asking the panel to introduce yourselves and telling a bit about your organisation? Can we please go to Miss Olivia first?
Hi everyone, I'm Olivia Nettleton. I'm an Associate Director at Revealing Reality. So we're a social research agency and we've done quite a bit of work in the online harm space. So we do work for people like Ofcom, the regulator, for government departments and also for charities, looking at what children and young people are doing online, what kind of experiences they're having. And we also use methodologies like online avatars to try and set up kind of pretend children's accounts on social media platforms and see the kinds of content that they're exposed to. But great to be here.
Professor Nash?
Thank you very much. So as I said, I'm Vicky Nash and I'm head of department at something called the Oxford Internet Institute, which is a bunch of researchers in Oxford trying to understand a bit more about the impact that digital technologies have on us and our lives. My own area of research has been around the best way, or perhaps the least worst way, I don't know, to regulate internet and other digital technologies, including with a focus on children and young people's experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Aitken?
Hi, I'm Mhairi Aitken. I'm a Senior Ethics Fellow at the Alan Turing Institute. The Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for AI and Data Science. And at the Turing, I work in the Public Policy Programme, and our work focuses primarily on kind of policy and regulatory responses to AI and data science, as well as the ways that AI and data science might be used in government and by public policy actors. I also lead a programme of work on AI and children. I'm particularly interested in the impacts that AI has on children and young people.
Thank you. We will now begin the session. The first question is to Olivia. What is your assessment of the links between social media platforms' violent content and young people committing violent acts?
Thank you. So yeah, we've done qualitative research. So that means not doing surveys, but going out and doing interviews with young people. And in that research, we will ask people to tell us what kinds of things they've seen online and what they think the impact of that has been on them. And they'll also tell us about other things that are going on in their life, such as whether there is kind of wider violence happening in their community or in their lives. So we have seen in a recent piece of work quite a lot of young people, particularly in certain areas that are potentially less socioeconomically advantaged, seeing content online which would be classified as violent. So they've seen things like fights, they've seen kind of weapons and illegal activity happening online. Some of the children that we spoke to told us that they did think this encouraged real life violence. For example, where they were seeing lots of fights happening in their school, they felt like if it was being filmed, that was kind of an incentive to then go out and fight more, because when it was being kind of publicised and shared around the school, there was then more of an incentive for children to react to that and fight back, whereas they felt if it wasn't being captured and shared on social media, maybe there'd be less of fighting going on in their schools. So certainly from some of the children's perspectives, it had led to more kind of localised violence in their areas. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to bring other panellists in now. Have you got anything to add?
So certainly from my perspective, one of the challenges in this area is that it is very difficult to prove a link between the things that people see or do online and the things that they do offline, which doesn't necessarily mean that there may not be connections between, for example, seeing more violent content online and that affecting perhaps your behaviour offline. It's just that there are usually likely to be a large number of factors behind it, which make it quite complicated to produce good academic evidence that there is a very clear causal link. So for me, I would have to say that having looked at the literature in this space, I haven't found good evidence of studies that suggest that consuming more violent content online clearly leads to an increase in violent behaviours offline. Doesn't mean that there aren't relationships, but it's quite hard to prove a causal link.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I would just echo that as well, and saying this is an area where I think we really do need a lot more research. There are examples that come out and different experiences that are shared, and clearly there's a range of different experiences, and taking account of particularly young people's different backgrounds, different experiences that are going to lead to different outcomes. We need a lot more research to really understand what the connections might be and what the links might be, and I think definitely need more research to explore this further.
Thank you. For the next question, I would like to go to Maximilian.
So my question is, how effective are safeguards on social media platforms in preventing young people from accessing inappropriate content?
We will go to Professor Nash first.
I suspect Olivia is going to have probably some really good examples and good data on this. Certainly, from an academic perspective, we have known for a long time that it is always impossible in the internet era to find, if you like, foolproof technical tools that stop people doing things completely. So short of literally, removing phones, removing computers, removing internet connections, people will always find a way to work around any technical measures you put in place. And it is the same with things like this. So I think what the most we can probably hope from measures that companies put in place or that governments require them to put in place is that what that might do is it ensures that we keep the worst sort of content or the worst sort of experiences away from maybe children and young people that aren't actively seeking them out. So in other words, it reduces the likelihood of stumbling upon, say in this case, violent content. But what you won't do is stop somebody who's very determined to find it or share it, because there are always ways of working around, whether through things like virtual private networks, setting up new accounts, peer-to-peer sharing, and so on. So yeah, I would say technical measures are always going to be less than 100% ineffective, but that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile to prevent children stumbling across this type of material.
Thank you. Olivia, have you got something to add?
Yeah, I would echo what Professor Nash has said there. We frequently see children kind of circumventing the current safeguards that are in place in terms of age assurance. Obviously, a lot of social media platforms do actually have restrictions, and particularly when we did the piece of work, particularly looking at violent content, one of the platforms we looked at was Snapchat, where at the time of the research there were meant to be additional safeguards put in place for anyone under 18, as well as having their kind of minimum age for being on the platform. But pretty much all the children and young people that we spoke to had different not true ages on when they'd signed up and created the account, and we regularly see that for a lot of the young people we speak to, they don't necessarily even feel like they have much of a choice to not be on social media, given that much of their social life is on social media, and actually even parents feel a lot of pressure to enable their children to access social media so that they don't get left out. So it is very difficult, and yeah, that currently I don't think is working very effectively at the moment.
Thank you. Does Dr. Aitken has something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, but I'd also say that I think that we should have better, maybe tougher expectations of what the platforms can do and should do to make systems safer by design for all users, including children and young people. I think that the approach so far has been based on young people or users kind of declaring their own age, and as has already been said, very easy to put in an older age, to change a date of birth to access a system or a platform. We are moving towards approaches that will require age assurance or to verifying ages of users. But I think still we should expect these systems to be safe by design. We should expect them to be safe places where people can engage, particularly young people engage. As has already been said as well, social media is very much a part of how young people interact, of how relationships take place, of part of our social world, part of how we access information about the world. And and the onus or the kind of it shouldn't be on young people or on users to have to navigate that in ways to ensure that it's safe. They should be safe by design, and so I think we should have higher expectations of what can be done and what should be done to make these spaces safe.
Thank you. We'll go to Sienna now for a follow-up question.
Yeah, Professor Nash, you said that there's always ways of working around like the sort of regulation social media has. So is there any way social media companies can like make it more effective in safeguarding young people, or maybe make reporting incidences more effective?
That is such an excellent question. Yes. So for me, the fact that you cannot completely rely on technical measures or safety by design mean that we need to look at the other measures that you should be putting in place as well. So for companies, I think there are two areas. So one is that they also have a role to play in educating and enabling children and young people to take action themselves. So that might mean, for example, giving you more control over what you see, the ability to reset your algorithm or to set your interests or to report content you don't want to see. So those things, they both, if you like, they help you understand what more you can do and enable you to take action. The second thing they can do is they can make more data available for us as academics and researchers to assess how well they're doing. So those are two quite crucial things. Obviously, there are other actors like government and parents who have a role to play as well, but I think you were just asking about companies.
Thank you for that. I just had another question about how to actually incentivize social media companies to be safe by design. And I will go to Professor Nash first.
So you probably do need sticks and carrots, as we do in every area of life. On the sticks side, we have got new regulatory measures like the Online Safety Act, which came into are in force but yet to be enforced. Under that, obviously, it's possible to impose large fines on companies that don't comply with the rules. So financial penalties, will hurt, and quite large fines are possible. You can also hold individuals responsible through legislation like that. So actually, if in future, for example, companies don't comply and also don't provide information when required to do so by Parliament, you'll be able to actually take action against senior individuals in the company. So you might hope that would encourage responsible behaviour as well. I think we've thought less about the carrot side. I personally think that there is a big market for technologies which are safe, but also positive and enriching for young people. I feel like, you are all quite poorly served at the moment. So I do think it would be helpful to explore what more possibility there could be, as I say, for more products, more services that actively serve young people. And of course, reputational benefits for being renowned as responsible companies in this space are worthwhile. But yeah, I do fear that only the very, very large fines will make much of a difference.
Thank you. I'll go to Dr. Aitken now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think that the fines and penalties that are coming in through the Online Safety Act, those are significant. That's a significant step forward, and that will have a real impact on practices, or certainly should have a real impact on practices. But also from the other side, the kind of the pressure or demands from users to have safe, age-appropriate platforms, and there's increasing media interest around this. There's increasing kind of public interest and public pressure around making sure that these platforms are safe. Obviously, we're also hearing a lot of reports of the social media ban for under 16s in Australia, and interest in the UK as well in potential social media bans. Personally, I don't think that social media bans are the right way to go, but that is creating a lot more interest, a lot more public interest, and kind of pressure on social media companies to think again about the ways that these platforms are developed, designed, and the ways that they're used. These are choices. They're choices around how we design these platforms and how they operate. It's not inevitable that they have to be the ways that they currently are. And so I do think that kind of pressure, that public pressure, media pressure, can also have an impact and can change the ways that these platforms are designed.
Thank you. Olivia?
Not much more to add, but the only other thing I would say is, from our perspective as an agency, we've been engaging children and young people on this for the last, I guess, 5 to 10 years, really. It does feel like there's a bit of a tipping point in terms of what young people themselves are starting to say about being on social media, and that kind of may lead to some pressure on businesses ultimately, if they want to keep young people on their platform, to try and change it and make it a bit more of a positive space.
Thank you. For the next question, I would like to go to Aman.
So first, if Olivia could answer this question. To what extent is violent content promoted by on social media platforms, and who should be held accountable when this happens?
Good question. I guess in terms of promoted by, you could include things like the design of the platform, and there are definitely some features that we've seen on certain platforms that maybe not, I don't necessarily think the designers have made them to actively promote violent content. I'm sure that was not at all their intention when they created the platforms, and we did actually do a project where we spoke to some social media designers, and often, they're driven by business metrics in terms of wanting young people to spend a lot of time on the platform, but some of those features also may enable content to be a lot more easily shared with a lot of people. So some particular features I'm thinking of that we saw, particularly on Snapchat, were things like the group chat functionality, stories functionality, that enable one bit of content to be really quickly shared with loads of people, and the other was just quick add, so people on Snapchat were able to really quickly add loads of other people who they don't necessarily know, and it just meant that some local violent content just spread really, really quickly. So yeah, I guess that would be one of the ways in which you could argue that it's being kind of probably unintentionally promoted. In terms of who should be held accountable, I mean, I think we've kind of spoken about this a bit, but obviously there is a responsibility on the platforms to make sure that they aren't creating platforms where content can be so quickly spread, and then it's not very easy to kind of remove content. I would say with the violent content in particular, some of the young people we spoke to said they would actually be quite hesitant to report that content for fear of coming across as a snitch, for example. And again, I'd reflect what Professor Nash said there in terms of this doesn't affect all children equally, and one child coming across a certain bit of violent content that's happening in an area completely, other side of the country to where they are, is much less likely to affect them or lead to any kind of real world impact. Whereas some of the children we spoke to, this was happening, down their road or at their school. It's much more likely to affect them in some way, not necessarily leading them to be violent, but, people avoid the roads that they go down, or may kind of change how safe they feel in their area, or may prompt them to think maybe more about what they need to be like to kind of do well in their area. So it definitely affects different people in different ways. Yeah, sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
Thank you. Have other panelists got any other insights to share?
Mhairi, if you go first for change.
Well, I guess in terms of the promotion of content, as an important part of how content is shared on social media platforms is, of course, through sort of algorithms or AI systems that will, filter and shape content or target. Prioritize different sort of content to different users. I know that's a big part of how the social media platforms work. What's been found, studies that have looked at how content is filtered or prioritized to different users is these algorithms are what they're aiming to do is keep people engaged, keep people on the platforms, keep them interacting with content on the platform. So what they're doing is looking at what kind of content are people most likely to interact with. That might be to share it, to like it, or to comment on it. And what's been found is that often the content that people are most likely to react with is not necessarily content that makes you happy. It's not necessarily content that you enjoy. Very often it's content that shocks or that provokes a negative response. And that can mean that content is being shared or being promoted or coming up on young people's feeds, not because they're actively seeking out or because they particularly like or enjoy that content, but because it's been predicted that is going to create a response. People are going to interact with it, are going to engage with it, and for that reason, it continues to show up on feeds. And I think that that's a really harmful trend when it is bringing up violent and inappropriate, harmful content. But it's part of how these algorithms are developed to optimize engagement and to keep people engaged, keep people interacting on a platform, not necessarily to make that a positive experience. And I think that's something where we really can demand a different set of expectations and a different set of approaches. That if content is being tailored and prioritized to different users, we should expect that to be for positive impacts and not simply for maintaining engagement where that might be through negative impacts.
If I could just add one more thing, I suppose I would emphasize that I do think there is a difficulty here, which is that whilst there's clearly an interest for these companies and these businesses to keep us online, so we maybe see more adverts or they get more data from us, it is also clear that as users, we want to see content that is relevant and engaging ourselves. And so, we do need some mechanisms in place to help identify things that we want to see, and that if you like, one measurement of that is our engagement, our likelihood to stay online. So, yeah, I think it is this difficulty that we probably do need algorithms. They certainly do on the whole help us find things that we are interested in online or that are relevant to us. The issue really is around these sort of smaller categories of content where we seem to be pushed in more extreme areas. So for me, it's a matter of balance rather than getting rid of personalization or getting rid of these algorithms completely.
Thank you. We've got a follow-up question from Sienna.
Yeah, my question's to Olivia. So you mentioned a bit about business metrics when you answered the question. So how can we encourage social media companies to take responsibility and kind of safeguard children without compromising their company and business and their income?
That's a great question. I'm sure that is one that lots of social media companies are constantly trying to battle, because it is difficult. Some of the things that ultimately meet their business goals and get attention and get users do sit in tension with, sometimes can sit in tension with children being safe online. I mean, even the fact that lots of really young children are on social media when they're not meant to be, they are users for the platform, which is great for them, but obviously not great for the child. So I think that's difficult, and that's obviously something that through regulation that will hopefully try and rebalance that a bit. To be honest, I'm not really sure exactly what else they can do. I don't know if anyone else on the panel has any other thoughts.
For me, this is about regulation. I do think that one of the problems we face as well is that there are different norms and expectations according to what part of the world you're operating your business in. So in Europe and the UK, our governments have shown a much greater willingness to engage with these companies and ask them to think about safety for young people online. In America, certainly at the federal level, there's been very, very little effort to do that. So it makes it also quite expensive for these companies who have to maintain different approaches to how the products and services they offer to users in different countries. So for me, the other big thing that would make a difference would be if not only our government in the UK and the European government, which is also doing quite a bit, but if, say, the US government and US states did much more in this space too. And I think that would make it easier for these companies to have joined up regimes which look after the interests of young people, in their global business rather than just in individual countries.
Thank you. For the next question, we will go to Samir.
So my question follows on quite nicely from that last one. It was more towards Professor Nash, who I've read done some work with the World Economic Forum. It was what lessons can the UK learn from international efforts to regulate social media? So like in Australia, they've got a policy recently for under 16s and a ban. Do you think that will be effective in the UK?
That's such a great question. So one of the few good things about being in a space where we don't have long-held and well understood regulations in place around the world is that what we do have is sort of a natural experiment, if you like, whereby you can look and see, just as you suggested with Australia, how other countries are managing it and what results that seems to deliver. My personal view on something like the Australian initiative is that I think that's unlikely to be effective except in very, very limited ways. For me, it fails to take into account young people's rights, positive rights and interests as well. I understand there wasn't much consultation with young people at all in advance of this initiative being introduced. And I think going back to the very first point we made, technical measures are quite easy to get around. So, short of literally taking devices off young people, I think it'll be fairly straightforward probably to sort of, lie about age, or have your parents even help you lie about your age. I think the other thing that we can learn, though, looking around the world, is about quite specific little interventions. So, for example, one of the things I'm interested in is in Europe, when they implemented their regulation, they introduced a requirement that these companies, Facebook, Meta, Instagram, Snap, TikTok, etc., have to provide access to their data about risks and harms to non-government organizations, to academics and so on. So if you like, they instead of marking their own homework, they're opening it up to other people. And I think that's an example where, we might see that being, for example, more effective than just, say, fines alone. So I do think having a bit of variety in how different countries approach this is going to be a way for us to identify which interventions are most helpful, but it does necessarily mean it may be a bit slower, whilst we all learn those lessons.
Thank you. Just a question from me. From your assessment, what do you think are the main challenges in regulating these social media platforms? And we'll go to Dr. Aitken first.
There are a number of challenges. We've already spoken about some of the current incentives that drive the business decisions of platforms, and needing to maybe create a new set of incentives. But regulation is clearly in fact giving those incentives in changing the conditions in which these platforms are operating, and creating very real penalties for not complying with those regulations. So I think those changing incentives are really important. Also, changing kind of societal expectations, the demands from the public around what we expect from these platforms, recognizing that social media is a part of our communities, it's a part of our society, it's a part of how we connect and how we relate to each other. But we have a role to play in setting the expectations of what those platforms look like, what they do, and how they operate. So I think that's a really important way of making those changes. I suppose the challenge there is to raise awareness that this is something that we can challenge. We don't need to accept the ways that platforms currently are or how they've been, but we can make demands of how we expect them to be in the future and change that. And I think that's a really important challenge to address. I guess another challenge that often comes up is the pace of innovation with these new technologies, with digital technologies, tends to be very, very fast. It's driven by big tech companies who are driving the pace of innovation, and the pace of innovation in terms of regulation or policy or responses from government tends to be a bit slower. Again, I don't think that's an inevitability. I don't think it needs to be the case, but I do think we need approaches to regulation or responses from government and policy that are kind of anticipating what's coming. So not just responding to what we know about risks or what we know about things that have gone wrong with how things are now or how they have been a few years ago, but anticipating what might be possible. How might these technologies develop in a year, in 5 years' time, and how can we ensure that regulation keeps up with that, and is going to be fit for purpose as these technologies evolve. I think that's a challenge, and it points to the importance of in government, in regulatory bodies and policy-making bodies, that we need to have people who really understand these technologies, who have the kind of skills and the expertise to understand these technologies, to know what might be happening and what might be the risks, not just today, but in a year's time or 5 years' time.
Thank you. We will go to Manel for the next question.
Thank you. I'd like to direct it to Ms. Nettleton, but then it's open to any other panelists as well. If we look at mental health and the rise in mental health issues for young people post-pandemic, what would you assess could be done even more to tackle the effects of harmful content online on youth mental health?
Good question. Obviously, that's a big issue, and there's I'm sure lots of different factors that have contributed to the kind of recent rises in poor mental health among young people. But definitely social media is one of the factors that we often look into. And there's lots of kind of mechanisms by which you could see mental health having a potential social media having a potential negative impact on mental health. I mean, one of the things which we often think about, which is slightly separate from the content itself having a direct impact, is the kind of sheer amount of time that a lot of the young people we speak to are spending on social media. And we've been tracking people's screen time and their kind of app usage over the last 7 years really, and just seeing that kind of increase year on year, just the sheer amount of time people are spending on social media. And as I'm sure algorithms have improved and there's more and more features that engage young people, people have told us about the fact that they just spend less and less time doing things offline, and we often talk about the opportunity cost of being online. So the time that you're spending engaging with that content, what are you not doing? Which personally I think probably does contribute to some of those factors. So yeah, there's definitely more that could be done in that arena to think about how social media has led to kind of poor mental health, and what could be done to kind of reverse that pattern.
Thank you. If any of the other panelists would like to feed in as well, if not, that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd just like to add, and I agree with all of that in terms of impacts on mental health. But I suppose it's important to acknowledge as well that it's not, it's not a clear-cut connection between social media and impacts on mental health. And there are many cases in which access to social media can be positive and can have positive impacts for young people's mental health, including through access to support networks or to access to communities or people with similar experiences. It can be particularly important for young people who aren't able to access support within their own kind of offline communities, or maybe people who are who need a safe space to discuss aspects of their identity or aspects of their experiences which they don't feel safe discussing within their families or within their offline communities. Having access to social media, having access to the internet can be incredibly positive in terms of accessing these other sources of support and communities. So I think it's really, really important that we don't take a kind of alarmist approach and view social media's impacts as being all negative. There are many cases in which this can be very, very positive. It is, again, about looking at not just social media as being like one set of impacts, but looking at the reality of what those experiences are, how young people are using social media. As was already said, it could also be about the amount of time that is on social media, but looking at the behaviours and the ways that relates to connections to community. If social media is something that connects young people to communities, that can be really positive. If it's something that creates a dependence in an online world that disconnects people from communities or leads to further isolation, that's of course incredibly negative. But it's going to be different for different people. So we need to take a much more nuanced look at what the real experiences on social media are.
If I can just reiterate that, so I think Dr. Aitken's made such an important point. So again, it goes back to what we said at the very beginning, that for all young people, individual experiences, individual backgrounds will make such a difference. And certainly all our research at the OII shows that if you look at a population level, there really is not good evidence for there to be a strong link between worsening mental health outcomes and use of social media. And screen time in particular is a very poor measure in its own right, although I do take the point about there being an opportunity cost to what you're not doing when you're online. But if I can just add one last point, I do think that whilst we are trying to do more research into what it is that makes particular individuals vulnerable to particular sorts of content and particular moments where there clearly is going to be room for more intervention, I would also flag that I think sometimes these debates they draw attention from other areas where governments, I feel, are failing to act. So in particular in putting in place appropriate levels of mental health support for young people, in very difficult economic times, post-COVID, etc. So I wouldn't want the focus just to be on social media in this context. I think we don't need to take our eye off these other much broader and perhaps even more important sort of societal factors as well.
Thank you. My next question is open to all panelists, and it is, do you think that Ofcom is empowered to hold these social media companies to account effectively? And we'll go to Olivia first.
I was going to say this might be one for the other two people. Not sure how much I'll be able to comment on that, to be honest. So yeah.
Professor Nash?
So I think the legislation gives them certainly enough powers to act. I think for me, there are a couple of areas, one of which actually Olivia might have more to say about, but there are a couple of areas where I have maybe some slight concern. So one is about the sheer scale or number of companies that they are expected to oversee in this space. So in practice, how much resource, how much time will they have to devote to hopefully they'll get to the worst offenders, but will they be able to address, if you like, so the long tail of companies who are maybe not cooperating with the spirit or the letter of the law? The second area is actually around how Ofcom will be able to tell whether or not companies are meeting their obligations. So I think, Olivia, you mentioned at the beginning, for example, that your organisation does quite a bit of work around trying to identify what children or what sort of avatars of children might experience online. And so certainly for me, one of the challenges I see is that we have clear expectations that companies, for example, will conduct risk assessments, which will set out how they plan to mitigate the worst risks. But in practice, how will Ofcom be able to tell whether or not those mitigations are effective enough? So, for me, that is really the sort of one of the biggest sort of enforcement gaps. Again, I do think they're taking it very seriously. I think they probably have enough financial resource, but I think technically that is a very hard question.
Thank you. Does Dr. Aitken have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would really just echo that. The Online Safety Act is a huge step forward, but the questions of enforcement and the resources, and also access to expertise and technical skills around the ways these platforms are used, around the ways that AI is used in these platforms, is substantial, and so it's an area where we hope to see more developments, and be really important to look at the approaches to enforcement that come in next year.
Thank you. We'll go to Vanya now for the next question.
I think your answer flows very well onto my question. I know you previously mentioned the benefits of the Online Safety Act, so I was curious as to whether you think that there is any other things that the Online Safety Act is capable of to prevent the promotion of youth violence, particularly in relation to young people. And I will go to Professor Nash first.
Again, a really good question. I suppose I'm sort of waiting to see how it pans out. I think it is such a major step forward. I wouldn't be in a rush to revise it. I think there are some things that I would have quite liked to see. Maybe one would have been a bit more focused on safety by design. At the moment, the Act as it was written certainly focused a bit schizophrenically on a lot of it was about content, and some of it was about how you design and build these technological platforms. I think in practice, Ofcom are focusing just as much on the latter, so maybe that's not much of a worry. I think a lot of it will also depend on how age assurance, so how these companies are expected to tell that they have children using their services, how that is enacted. I think that for me will also be something that needs to be reviewed. So in particular, I have a very slight concern that if we don't set high enough standards around, for example, privacy and accuracy and non-intrusiveness and so on, that some platform that children may not benefit, that the trade-offs may be too great, and so that seems to me that'd be problematic. Or the other approach, I suppose, would be that it may be too burdensome for adults. So again, I'm keen not to sort of revise it now, but those are the two areas I would have liked to see perhaps more detail or more thought about.
Thank you. For the next question, we'll go to Macy.
This is just like a quick question for Dr. Aitken, if that's possible. I was reading a bit about your work at the Alan Turing Institute about the ethics of like generative AI and emergent AI policy and regulation. And I just wanted to quickly ask about what your assessment is on the impact of AI and its advancement, and how like access to AI and and how that links to could possibly link to the harmful creation of content, and maybe about the challenges that AI can bring towards regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I suppose the impacts of AI can be both positive and negative, and it's important to know that there are huge opportunities to use AI in really positive ways, including for children and young people. AI can do amazing things in terms of personalizing education. It can also be used in really playful, fun, creative experiences for children and young people. But it brings lots of risks as well. I suppose particularly with developments in generative AI, which is the area of AI where we've seen a lot of interest over the last couple of years. Generative AI is a category of AI technologies that can be used to create new content. That includes systems that can make images, that can produce text or produce videos. And again, these can be used in lots of really positive, beneficial ways, but they can also be used, for example, to spread misinformation or disinformation, so spreading fake content online, fake images, fake videos, also fake audio. And that can be used in ways which can spread misinformation and can make it very difficult to reliably or accurately identify what is real or what is fake. They can also be used to create fake images of real people. And that, of course, brings risks in terms of how that might be used to cause harm, to humiliate, or to be used to kind of bullying, or in ways that have very negative impacts on individuals. These technologies, we've seen really rapid development in generative AI over the last few years, and that is posing challenges for regulation to kind of keep up with what's happening with these technologies and to effectively address them, particularly in relation to children and young people. I think the particular needs and experiences of children and young people have so far not really been considered within debates around responses to AI and generative AI. And that's really important because we know that children are perhaps the group who will be most impacted by advances in these technologies, but they're not represented in decision making around the ways that we regulate or respond to those technologies. And so I think that's a really, really important area, and we need much more consideration of the particular impacts of these technologies on children and young people, but also the opportunities to use these technologies in positive ways that can be really beneficial for young people.
Thank you. We've got another question from Vanya now.
So under the Online Safety Act, how effective do you think the newly proposed measures for age verification in particular is effective, and how do you think that would work? I can start with Dr. Aitken.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is again a big step forward in terms of moving from access to platforms being purely by users declaring their own age, which is very easy, as has already been said, to put in an older age. So moving towards age verification is a step forward to having more assurance of the real age of users. But it's definitely not straightforward, and there's lots of different approaches being proposed as to how that could happen in practice. This will come in to be enforced in 2025. I think there are some real concerns that with age verification technologies, that this might bring new risks for privacy, or lead to approaches that collect and process more personal information about users to be able to verify ages. Some of the technologies that could be used including facial recognition technologies that might require you to scan a face to identify an individual's age, or other technologies that collect or process information about a user's identity. There's risks here that in order to make these systems most accurate and most reliable, they require the most information or might have a greater invasion on privacy of users. And so I think it's really important that we develop approaches that take that kind of balanced approach, that are accurate and reliable, but don't infringe on privacy. And I think that's a really, really difficult area to get right. There's a lot of work in this space that's looking at what are the most effective and most appropriate techniques to do that. But it's a very challenging area.
Before we hear from the other panelists, I wanted to comment on the facial recognition aspect of that. I think that is one of the key ways they're looking at using age verification, but I think there would be a lack of effectiveness with that, because it's very difficult for people who maybe look mature for their age to, be safeguarded in an effective manner. And then again, for those who are younger, who might be able to access such content, I think it would be very difficult for that to work. So do you have any other propositions for how they would be able to verify age effectively? I understand that you've mentioned the issues with privacy and things like that, but I don't see a way of that working.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of different technologies being proposed and being developed. Facial recognition is one example. It's not the only example. And yeah, lots of different technical approaches being proposed to develop this. I think that there are still risks around, if this is requiring collection or processing of information or personal information or identifiers of individuals. This still poses risks to privacy. And you're right as well, in terms of these technologies, no technology is going to be perfect. And we have to pay really careful attention to whether they work equally well for everybody in terms of identities, backgrounds, ages. And that, again, is a real challenge, especially AI technologies are often found to have biases or biases, which mean that they might not work as reliably or as accurately for everybody who uses them. And that's another key area to explore when developing these technologies, as to how effective they are for everybody who might come into interaction with them.
If I can add, so one, I suppose for me, one area where I do feel we have made quite a bit of progress since 2017, when these sort of measures were first proposed, I think is around two areas. So one, which we might want to talk about further, is the idea of assessing age according to things like voice or face, etc., which will necessarily, I think, be fallible, but maybe will get better. They might also be discriminatory. They might be better at assessing age for some individuals, or etc., than others. But the other, I suppose, is around the idea that what you might see is the development of services where you prove your age once, using probably a document like a passport or a driving license or a national insurance card, with the difficulty being that not all children have passports, for example. You don't get a driver's license till you're older, so that will be probably excluding some individuals. But maybe you do that once with a service that then provides, if you like, a sort of a token or a credential every time you interact with, say, some other service or website online, either by using a password or maybe your fingerprint, etc. So there are measures emerging which are probably more privacy protecting and maybe a bit more accurate than we had in 2017. But I think Dr. Aitken's done a good job of expressing sort of what the limitations are. So it is an upward. I think things are going in an upward direction, but they are still very much far from perfect.
Thank you. We'll go to Beth now.
Oh my goodness, sorry. This is for Dr. Aitken. With regards to UNCRC, children and young people do have the right to access technology and information. So how would you propose, with your experience, of how policymakers can engage with young people when creating policy on social media, and how that can still respect their rights?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important. It's also important to note that, in terms of children's rights, that it's not just about avoiding the risks or identifying negative impacts of these technologies, but also about how we ensure positive impacts of access to technologies, and recognizing that access to technologies, including social media, can be really positive in terms of children's rights to education, in terms of children's rights to play and to relax, which includes in the digital world, and also children's rights to freedom of expression, and lots of the other rights within the UNCRC, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I think it's really, really important when we think about policy making and regulation that we start from that point of thinking about children's rights and recognizing that this is of course, a big part of that is about addressing the risks, but is also about seeking to maximize the positive opportunities for children to have access to these technologies and benefit from those technologies. But to ensure that the impact of those technologies is positive, we need to think about how what is required to design and develop those systems in ways that have children's best interests in mind from the beginning. And I think in your question, you mentioned how to engage with children to do that. And that is absolutely crucial. Too often, children and young people are not included in decision-making processes around the ways these systems are designed and developed, but also around decision-making processes in policy and regulation. So decisions then are made from a starting point of adults' experiences or adults' assumptions of what children's needs might be or how children might use these systems. And we know that children and young people are going to use technologies in very different ways from how adults use them, and often in ways that are unexpected or unanticipated from an adult's point of view or an adult's perspective. So to get this right, we really need to involve children and young people in those decision-making processes and understand what their actual experiences are, what their actual needs are, how they really interact with these technologies, and what the risks as well as opportunities of that might be. And I think that's absolutely crucial. It's also one of the rights within the UNCRC that if every child or young person has a right to a voice and a say on decisions that affect their lives, and decisions around social media clearly affect the lives of children and young people. So should absolutely be a part of the process of making decisions about those technologies.
Thank you. Olivia, from your experiences, have you got any insights to share on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously, research is one of the ways by which you can engage children and young people, and government departments and Ofcom, the regulator, obviously do a lot of research, and some of it my company do. So in that research, the regulator, Ofcom, might come to us and say, we need to work on this bit of regulation, like we want to know what children and young people think, and we will go out and try and speak to engage a really broad range of young people and children to gather their views, and that is just one small channel by which children's views can be fed back and hopefully embedded in policy making and regulation.
Thank you. I believe the next question is from Sophie.
Yeah, I'd just like to direct this question to Dr. Aitken, but of course if the other panellists have something to add, please feel free to do so. I just want to pick up on something you mentioned about media literacy. How important is it that young people are given the tools and the education to improve their ability to distinguish fact from fiction? And what impact could this have on young people's response to violent or shocking content?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really crucial. And as I said, with advances in generative AI technologies, it is becoming harder and harder to reliably or consistently identify things as being AI generated or real. And that poses real risks for how we can trust the information that we come across online, including on social media. It's really important to have an understanding of the ways that AI might be used and the ways that AI might create AI generated content, and to have some understanding of some of the ways that you could potentially identify AI generated content. But at the same time, I would say that the onus, the responsibility here should not be on users, and it should not be particularly on children or young people to identify what is AI generated and what is real. Really, we need to think about the responsibility of platforms to be identifying AI generated content, to be flag AI generated content, and to be transparent about that. But nevertheless, there's an important role for ensuring digital literacy, to ensuring critical understandings of the ways that these systems work, as well as understanding how algorithms are used to filter content online, and to understand how that content is being, or why certain content might be being shared online on social media. Also in terms of kind of engagement with parents, with carers, with schools, with teachers, to ensure that there are opportunities to have conversations about interactions on social media, and to create those kind of open spaces for conversations, particularly if young people might be coming across violent or inappropriate content. It's really important that young people have places they can go to, adults that they trust, that they're able to have open, honest conversations about what is happening on social media. And that's again why I think it also is really important that or one reason why I don't agree with the approach of having bans on social media, because actually we want to have an environment in which young people feel safe to talk about their experiences online, and to speak to adults in their life about things that they might be coming across, concerns they might have, and have opportunities to discuss that. But with that, we also need, as you say, that digital literacy and critical digital literacy to understand why certain things are coming up on social media feeds.
Thank you. And my last question is from all panelists. First, we will go to Olivia. What do you think our committee should recommend to the government? Have you got any suggestions?
Well, I think, there's obviously a lot happening in terms of regulation, upcoming regulation in this space. So I think emphasising the parts of that you believe are the most kind of pressing to address. Continual engagement with children and young people so that you have a chance to share your views, and as has been discussed, both the positives and the negatives of being online, which is ever evolving, and as new technologies come into play, I'm sure there'll be new impacts and kind of nuanced things to consider there. So ensuring that there is that continual channel by which young people have an opportunity to feed into future policy and regulation.
Thank you. Dr. Aitken?
I suppose to take a measured approach to recognise that the impacts of social media can be very different depending on people's experiences and backgrounds. So a kind of a blanket approach or a kind of reactionary approach to some of the risks might also lead to negative impacts in terms of reducing the benefits or opportunities that social media presents. So taking a balanced view, recognising that we need to really understand the full range of experiences that young people have in terms of social media. And then also recognising that really the experts in young people's interactions with social media or impacts of social media on young people, the experts are young people themselves. And so to make good decisions about policy and regulation or development of social media, we need young people involved in those decisions and young people's real experiences and expertise in that area to inform those decisions. And that would certainly be, my recommendation.
Thank you. Professor Nash?
I would agree with everything that's just been said. So I suppose maybe two concrete things to finish on. One, I do wonder whether, given Ofcom's expansive role in upholding and enforcing this new regulatory framework in the future, I wonder whether there might be scope for a children and young persons panel there. They previously have things like consumer panel, which enables them to consult with audiences who are affected by the application and enforcement of regulations. So that might be a good place to have young people's views about the adequacy of how things are going, and also maybe talk about new trends emerging or new concerns emerging. And then I think there's probably a couple of areas where I would really want to see both maybe more investment in research, but also probably in support services. So one would be around that very first question you asked. So what is the link between online experiences and experiences of violence externally? So I think it's really important that we continue to research and study that. But I think it's also just as important that we have enough resource to, police and safeguard our local communities, to provide mental health services at an appropriate level for children and young people. So in other words, ensuring that this problem is never limited just to sort of the interaction between social media and violence, but also recognises the other factors in play.
Thank you so much for those excellent suggestions, and that concludes our session for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Order.